Betrayed by the very crown she once helped forge, Anne Boleyn faced her fate not with fear, but with unwavering dignity. From her swift rise to the throne, to the web of political intrigue, false charges, and a meticulously planned execution by sword, her story is one of both triumph and tragedy. On the morning of May 19th, 1536, the sky above the Tower of London was a dreary grey, the first hint of a grim fate that would soon unfold. In the inner courtyard, a scaffold stood, not the usual raised platform, but a lower structure designed for something unusual, a foreign executioner wielding a sharp sword, not the customary English axe. The crowd that began to gather whispered in hushed tones, for they knew today would be a historic event. Today, a queen would die, the first in England's history. Anne Boleyn, the woman who had changed the course of the kingdom and set England on a path that would forever sever ties with Rome, was about to face her grim fate. For the past 17 days, Anne had been a prisoner within the tower's cold stone walls, but this morning she awoke to the reality of her final day. Despite the uncertainty, she still held the regal air that had once captivated the mighty King Henry VIII. Her loyal ladies-in-waiting helped her dress, and she chose carefully. A dark gray mantle lined with fur, under which she wore a crimson bodice. The choice was practical and dignified, colors that would not stain with blood. Anne, however, showed no fear as she prepared for her execution. "I hear the executioner is very good," she remarked, gently touching her neck with a wry smile. "I have a little neck." Her words, as recorded by witnesses, spoke of both courage and a dark sense of irony in the face of her inevitable death. In those final moments, Anne Boleyn confronted her fate with an unshaken grace, a testament to the strength and dignity she maintained even in the face of death. Anne Boleyn, the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, an ambitious diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, born into noble blood, grew up immersed in the refined culture of the French court. There, she absorbed the elegance of the Renaissance, which would later define her. Upon her return to England in 1522, Anne wasn't considered a traditional beauty by the standards of the time. With olive skin, dark eyes, and black hair, she defied the pale complexion and blonde ideal. However, what Anne lacked in appearance, she more than made up for with sharp intelligence, fluency in languages, artistic knowledge, and an undeniable magnetic presence that captivated those around her. When King Henry VIII, desperate for a male heir, turned his attention to Anne, she rejected his advances, refusing to become just another mistress like her sister, Mary Boleyn. "I will not be your concubine," she reportedly said. "If you want my heart and body, you must give me a crown." It was a daring gamble, but one that would alter the course of English history forever. For 7 long years, from 1526 to 1533, Henry pursued Anne relentlessly. His obsession led to a break with the Catholic Church, the creation of the Church of England, and a revolution in England's religious structure. To marry Anne, he defied the Pope and Emperor Charles V, fundamentally changing the nation's future. Anne's courage and refusal to settle would go on to reshape England and history itself. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. In January 1533, Anne Boleyn and King Henry VIII secretly wed, with Anne already pregnant. But in September, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, not the son Henry so desperately wanted. Her reign as queen lasted only 3 years, but her impact was immense. Anne was a visionary, intelligent, sharp, and a champion of religious reforms. She supported scholars and promoted English translations of the Bible, previously forbidden. To her supporters, she was a reformer. To her enemies, a manipulative heretic. Anne's downfall began with her failure to produce a male heir. After Elizabeth, she suffered 2 miscarriages, one in 1534 and another in 1535, this time of a male fetus. For Henry, obsessed with a male heir, these failures were unforgivable. As his affection waned, Anne's enemies, especially Thomas Cromwell, grew stronger, setting the stage for her eventual fall from grace. In April 1536, a plot to bring down Anne Boleyn gained traction. Thomas Cromwell masterminded an investigation into the Queen's supposed misconduct, accusing her of heinous crimes. On May 2nd, Anne was arrested and sent to the Tower of London. The charges were outlandish: adultery with 5 men, including her brother George Boleyn, conspiracy against the king, and treason. Her trial on May 15th was a mockery of justice. Anne had no right to an attorney or the chance to confront her accusers. The tribunal, made up almost entirely of her political foes, was stacked against her. Despite this, Anne defended herself with remarkable grace and intelligence. A witness later described her as answering every question so wisely that she seemed more angel than woman. But it didn't matter. The outcome had already been decided before the trial began. Anne was found guilty and sentenced to death by burning, a brutal punishment for female treason. Yet, in a final act of mercy, or perhaps to protect his reputation abroad, Henry VIII commuted her sentence to beheading. He brought in a French executioner, known for his skill with a sword, promising Anne a swift and relatively painless death. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn's fate was sealed. But it wasn't until 8 a.m. that she learned her execution had been delayed until noon. The cruel postponement was a bitter blow, as Anne had already prepared herself psychologically for her final moments. Time seemed to drag, and she spent those extra hours in prayer, her thoughts consumed with the end that loomed ahead. Witnesses recount how she took communion, pausing frequently to murmur, "Lord, have mercy on me." In a final act of defiance, she swore upon the sacred host that she had never betrayed King Henry VIII, declaring, "For my salvation, I am free of the things for which I was condemned." At noon, the dreadful sound of drums filled the air. Anne bid farewell to her ladies-in-waiting, giving each one a parting gift, a prayer book, a handkerchief, or a piece of jewelry. Her voice, steady and composed, asked them, "Remember me and how I end?" before she was led to the scaffold. The crowd that had gathered to witness her execution was smaller than anticipated, no more than 1,000 people. Strangely, the atmosphere was not one of revelry or hatred, but one of uneasy respect. As Anne appeared, dressed in her gray and crimson gown, the crowd grew quiet, and most removed their hats in a gesture of reverence. She walked with the same dignity that had marked her life, moving to the scaffold with calm composure. Once on the scaffold, Anne was given permission to speak, and she chose her words carefully. In a voice both measured and dignified, she addressed the crowd. "Good Christians, I come here to die according to the law, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord." With these words, Anne Boleyn displayed an extraordinary grace. She did not plead for her life, nor did she try to justify herself or refute the charges. Instead, she portrayed herself as a loyal subject of the king, preserving his dignity and legacy even in the face of her unjust death. It was a masterful political maneuver, designed not only to protect her own honor, but to safeguard the future of her daughter Elizabeth. By making no accusations, by showing such composure, Anne ensured that her daughter, who would one day rule as Elizabeth I, would be viewed as the legitimate heir of a queen who had been loyal to her king. After her final speech, Anne calmly removed her mantle and cap, handing them to her ladies-in-waiting. In one of her final acts of generosity, she gave the executioner a purse of gold coins, payment for a job well done. She then knelt on the scaffold, ready to face her fate. But as she knelt, something was wrong. Unlike executions with an axe, there was no block to rest her head on. The French tradition of beheading with a sword required the condemned to remain upright, kneeling without any support. Anne, ever composed, did not flinch. One of her ladies, in a final act of tenderness, tied a blindfold over Anne's eyes. With her head bowed in prayer, Anne continued to move her lips, whispering, "Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul." Then the executioner, following a tradition used to ease the condemned, asked, "Where is my sword?" It was a trick to distract her, a momentary misdirection before he carried out the brutal task. Anne turned her head slightly toward his voice, and in that fleeting moment the executioner struck with brutal precision. The blade of the sword severed her neck in one clean motion, a swift and merciful death. A strange silence followed, broken only by a collective sigh from the crowd. There was no cheering, no celebration of her death. Instead, a murmur of discomfort spread through the onlookers. The executioner held up Anne's head by the hair, raising it high for all to see, and proclaimed, "So perish the king's enemies." But the crowd's reaction was far from approval. Instead, a heavy unease hung in the air, as though the execution had not been the triumph of justice many had expected, but a moment of tragic finality. At that very moment, the thunder of cannon fire resounded across the tower. It was the signal to Henry VIII, waiting in his Whitehall palace, that the way was now clear for him to marry again. Just a day later, Henry became formally engaged to Jane Seymour, and 10 days after that, they were married. Anne's body was collected by her ladies. In a final indignity, there was no coffin prepared for the former queen. Instead, her body was placed in an empty arrow chest, with her head resting beside her trunk. She was taken to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower, where her remains were hastily buried in an unmarked grave. No tombstone, no memorial, nothing to mark the grave of a queen who had once shaped England's destiny. In an attempt to completely erase her memory, Henry VIII ordered all portraits of Anne destroyed, her emblem removed from royal palaces, and her name stricken from official records. This damnatio memoriae was so thorough that, to this day, no authenticated contemporary portrait of Anne exists. Yet despite Henry's best efforts, Anne's legacy endured. Even in death, she had left an indelible mark on the history of England, and the future of her daughter, who would go on to become one of the greatest monarchs in history, Queen Elizabeth I. 23 years after her tragic execution, Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth, ascended to the throne of England. Elizabeth I's reign, which lasted 45 years, would be remembered as a golden age for England. In almost every way, Elizabeth surpassed her father, Henry VIII. The stability Henry had so desperately sought was finally achieved, but it came through the daughter he had once deemed a disappointment. In 1876, during renovations of the chapel at St. Peter ad Vincula, where Anne was believed to be buried, workers unearthed a female skeleton. The delicate bone structure and small skull were identified as likely belonging to Anne Boleyn. Her remains were reburied with more dignity than before, in recognition of her status as queen. Today, the site of Anne's execution is marked by a simple glass slab on the Tower of London's lawn. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, roses are placed there by admirers. For many, Anne Boleyn has come to symbolize not just a tragic figure, but the historical injustice faced by powerful women throughout history. The ultimate irony lies in Elizabeth's reign. Despite being considered a failure by her father, Elizabeth I deliberately cultivated the characteristics of her mother, even adopting the Boleyn white falcon emblem. Learning from Anne's fate, Elizabeth never married, declaring herself the Virgin Queen, married only to England. Elizabeth's successful reign was built upon the ashes of Anne's sacrifice, a sacrifice that began on that gray morning in 1536, when Anne Boleyn walked with grace and dignity to her death.